Our second resolution is going to be looking at Iran, and particularly the aftermath of the Iran nuclear deal being first agreed to and then called off. The Iran nuclear deal, officially called the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was meant to slow down Iran's development of nuclear weapons. It was negotiated and agreed to by the Obama administration. It was called off by the Trump administration. Now Iran is beginning to cross some of the boundaries that that deal set in place. The upshot of all of this, that's what we're going to be going after with this next resolution. The world is safer without the JCPOA, without the Iran deal. Our first speaker on this resolution will be Reuel Marc Gerecht. Reuel Marc Gerecht on the resolution. The world is safer without the JCPOA. Are you yes or no? Can you say it out loud for the folks at home?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it fairly straightforwardly. One, the historian in me says, you know, it's a little too soon to tell. But what we do know, I think, is a general rule. It's not a good idea for American foreign policy to be built on self-deception. That's essentially what the JCPOA is. We're deceiving ourselves of its value. It should not be built on blackmail. That's essentially what the Iranians were doing. They were saying if you do not do, if they don't publicly do certain things with the nuclear program clandestinely, they can do whatever they want because the system of verification, that deal is so awful, that we'll give you billions of dollars in return. I also think appeasement isn't a terribly good start for American foreign policy, and that's essentially what we're doing. We're appeasing the Iranians. We're giving them billions and billions of dollars, and they can use it any way they wish. And one of the ways they use it is by expanding their influence in the Middle East, by engaging in mass slaughter in Syria. And I think we should always dwell on that, the Iranian role that they've had in Syria. They've essentially run much of the Syrian armed forces. They have been the masters on the ground. And yet we're giving them billions of dollars to engage in the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of people and to move millions from that country. I think it's just a very unwise policy to deceive yourselves and thinking that down the road it's going to get better. We should approach this realistically. Now, we do not know what Donald Trump is going to do. No one does, including him.
Thank you, Reuel Marc Gerecht. The resolution, the world is safer without the JCPOA. Bernard Haykel, how do you declare?
I would say it is absolutely safer, and that is because Iran took advantage of this deal to build up its ballistic missile capability. It used the money that was given to it by the United States to spend not on its own population, but on proxy fighters and militiamen who fought in Syria in the civil war. They built better drones, better guidance systems for their missiles and their drones, which we're now seeing being deployed in Yemen that are threatening the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb. The Iranians basically took advantage of this deal and said, you know, well, we'll halt this nuclear stuff, which they can always restart, and in return, we gave them a pass on all the other stuff that they were doing, which made the region much more dangerous than it ever has been. So I think that, you know, it is definitely safer, and it is also, and I agree here with Reuel, which is that it is built on a deception. It's in fact built on a form of hubris and pride. The United States believed, certain elites in the United States, and you'll hear this view in a minute, felt that we could move within the different circles of power in Iran. We could kind of push the moderates against the more extremists, and that the deal would help the moderates. This is all hogwash. Iran is a theocracy. It's run by one man, and that man is no moderate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernard Haykel. Michael Doran, on the resolution, the world is safer without the JCPOA. Are you yes or no?
Yes, I'm with my colleagues here. I agree with every word that they said. It was a massive self-deception. And, you know, one of the things that we know now from the atomic archive, which the Israelis spirited out of Tehran, is that we didn't understand how far along Iran was in terms of building a nuclear weapons program. It was much more advanced in terms of weaponization than we realized. And we also didn't realize that they were continuing a clandestine program It's all much clearer now. What they did back in 2003 when the United States went into Iraq, they were afraid that George W. Bush might attack them, and some of their program had been discovered and was being investigated by the International Atomic Energy Association. And so what they did is they started to emphasize the parts of the program, to declare the parts of the program that could be plausibly explained as part of a civil nuclear program, while putting deeper underground the hidden parts. And when I say underground, I mean actually underground, like the Fordo missile, the Fordo site, which was built solely to enrich uranium to build a nuclear weapon. And under the JCPOA, they have kept Fordo, and they haven't done any of the repurposing of it that they were supposed to do according to the agreement. So what we have done is given an international cover for them to continue their covert program.
Thank you,
it's
Michael
massive
Doran.
Self-deception.
Thank you. On the resolution, once again, the world is safer without the JCPOA. Barbara Slavin, do you declare yes or no?
The world is definitely not safer without the JCPOA. You notice that these gentlemen are all referring to missiles and other issues. The deal was supposed to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon for at least 15 years by preventing Iran from having sufficient material to make a nuclear weapon for 15 years. It provided for the most intrusive inspection system ever negotiated, and Iran was in full compliance with this agreement when President Trump withdrew. Since he did that, the Middle East has become a much more dangerous place than it was before. The Iranians were patient for a year. They did nothing. They took no steps. But after a year, and after the Trump administration imposed a total embargo on the sale of Iranian oil, all of a sudden there were sabotage incidents in the Persian Gulf, and the Iranians have begun to exceed some of the limits set in the JCPOA. We are profoundly not safer. In terms of their regional influence, this is something that goes back a long time, has to do with other mistakes made by the United States, and the fact that our own diplomacy is so poor should not be a reason for railing against the Iranians for having influence in the region. We were safer with the deal. We could have built on it. Now we have nothing.
Thank you, Barbara Slavin. Brett McGurk, on the resolution, the world is safer without the JCPOA. Are you yes or no?
I'm also a no. I just think look at the facts. On June 21st, just a couple months ago, President Trump tweeted that he was cocked and loaded to bomb 3 strikes in Iran, but then 10 minutes before the strike, he said he stopped it because he learned at the last minute he might kill 150 Iranians. So just think about that. We are on the verge of a new military conflict, which even if you think that strike was justified, and I could actually argue that case, it would have been launched with no thought to the consequences, no planning for the consequences. Iran would have reacted. How would we reacted? And up the escalatory ladder, it would have gone. And how did we get to that point? Trump pulled out of this deal without any consideration of what would happen or what would come next. And the question on the resolution is not whether the JCPOA is a good or bad deal. The question is whether the world is safer. I will stipulate Iran is a terrible, terrible country under the leader of Ayatollah Khamenei. Iran has killed colleagues of mine. Iran is an enemy of the United States of America. But is the world safer without the deal? The answer is no. Since Trump left the deal with no plan, Iranian behavior in the region has gotten worse, even according to the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. It's gotten more aggressive, targeting oil tankers in the Straits of Hormuz. It's actually increased support in many ways to its proxy militias. It has dramatically strengthened its ties with Russia and China, our 2 great power competitors. And if we get into an ill-conceived war with Iran, we will lose the century to China. There's a lot more to say on this topic, but given the time, the answer is no.
Thank you, Brett McGurk. So on the resolution, the world is safer without the JCPOA, we have 3 yeses and we have 2 noes. I want to take the point that both Barbara Slavin and Brett McGurk, who are the 2 noes on this, to Reuel, Marc, Gerecht, who are basically saying Iran's behavior since the U.S. pulled out of the deal has gotten worse. The world is not safer. The world is less safe, demonstrably, at the hands of Iran's activities.
I'm not sure how you can argue that. I mean, I think it's fair to say that Iran's behavior before they pulled out of the JCPOA was abominable, was atrocious, it was hideous. It was during Obama's administration that the Iranians went wild in Syria, and President Obama did nothing. Part of the reason why he did nothing, I think, because he was gunning for this nuclear deal, and he was gunning for the illusion of having some diplomatic breakthrough with the Islamic Republic. And I just have to get back to this. We don't know what the Iranians are doing clandestinely. The JCPOA is like Swiss cheese. The notion that we have an idea of what they're doing clandestinely was, I think, disproved by what happened immediately after the deal was sealed, and that is we went back into Parchin in this sort of robot-controlled, Iranian-controlled inspection, and what did we find? We found 2 more particles of uranium. What did the IAEA do? Nothing. It did nothing because no one wanted to do anything. The Israelis gave the IAEA information about a warehouse in Tehran, which came out of the documents that were seized. What did they find there? Uranium again. What
from
did
an
the
old
IAEA
program.
done?
From
So
an
your
old
point is that
program.
they were cheating on the deal.
They could be cheating. We don't know. We didn't
we didn't
interview any of their scientists. We didn't get the paperwork. We didn't follow any of the standard protocols that the IAEA uses.
Let me bring Barbara in.
Uranium, particles like that can, as we know, they have an enormous half-life. How do you know that this didn't date
Let's go find out.
previous work, which was stopped in 2003?
I agree with you, Barbara. Let's go find out. Let's go back in there and inspect.
Well, how are we supposed to do that if this deal is collapsing? And what's the IAEA going to do if we have no agreement?
The Europeans can call for that anytime they want.
I'm sorry, we've undermined the deal.
We've
undermined our ability to find out what's going on.
I want to point out that you actually argued this treaty in a previous debate with us.
And I won.
That night you won.
Decisively. No,
Let's not get ahead of our skis here. Okay, go ahead.
I think what Reuel is saying is that the IAEA is not going in and inspecting because the JCPOA powers have sent a very clear message to it that they don't want them to go in and inspect sites, because they know that if they go to a military site and demand inspection, as they have the right to under the JCPOA, the Iranians will say, get stuffed, and that will end the JCPOA. So there's this dance going on, this self-delusion, where the IAEA is not asking questions that it knows it's going to get a bad answer to.
Brett McGurk, I mean, there's a little bit of a note here that Iran is dangerous anyway, with or without nuclear weapons, that it has, and this came out, it has money, it has influence, it has bedfellows in dangerous and risky places. How does that factor come into this whole conversation about the world is safer or not without the deal?
Look, they have a nuclear program. We gave them this Particles for Peace program that Eisenhower started. We actually started their nuclear program. They then made a clandestine program through AQ Khan and the Russians and the Chinese, but they have a nuclear program. This is the real world. I'm not ideological about this. I'm very practical. How do you deal with the nuclear program? There are 2 ways. Diplomacy, through a deal that's not going to be perfect, but you want to buy as much time as you can, or a military strike. And all assessments of a military strike, as reported in the New York Times, and not disclosing anything, you're going to set the program back by 1 or 2 years. And then what? So, I mean, the question is, do you favor a military strike to set back the program 1 or 2 years, or do you favor very imperfect diplomacy to buy time? You hear a lot about the fact that since sanctions came back on Iran, they have a lot less money. Here's the truth. They spend very little money on these proxy groups.
Right.
Even according to State Department figures that came out last year, they spend about $2 billion a year max on their proxy groups. You are not going to sanction your way to better Iranian behavior. I agree with my colleagues to the right of this stage. I don't like the Iranians. They are an enemy of the United States of America. We have to work with our allies around the world to build alliances to make sure that we contain their behavior and push back. But we are at risk by this unilateral policy, as I mentioned, of losing the century here in the region to China and Russia. I was in Beijing not long ago. The Chinese have a very sophisticated Middle East policy. They are investing in 4 countries with comprehensive strategic partnerships: Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and UAE. And the Saudis are embracing this posture. We are increasingly isolated by the way Trump has gotten out of this deal, and I do not believe it's working in our interest.
Bernard, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I would say that coming out of this deal has basically just lifted the veil on this regime and on the people who have been trying to pretend that this is a regime that can moderate, that can change, that can become different. And the way in which Iran has often been described is that there's this...
But do you think the deal was premised on that notion that Iran
Yes,
would go
Premised
through
on
those?
that
absolutely.
notion. That's nonsense.
Absolutely. The deal was premised on the notion that there were these two factions within the regime, and that ultimately some form of normalization would happen, would come out and result from this deal, because people within Iran would say, look, you know, such benefits have come out of this. We need to become closer and better, have a better relationship with the West. And that's just never going to happen. This is a regime that every Friday in its principal mosque, every Friday for 40 years, has cried out, death to America. Every day.
But
Imagine
if your opponents are arguing that at least deny that regime 15 years worth of nuclear development as opposed to responding after the fact for a 2-year delay, that 15 years is better than 2 years.
Well, first of all, I don't think that delay actually, as my two colleagues have argued, was actually possible. Second, it gave them a pass on all this other stuff that they were doing. Mm-hmm. And you know, if you had stopped everything, the ballistic missiles, the proxy stuff, then fine. I would say this is a good deal, but it's not that.
All right, let me go to one of the two no's.
So I would just,
Barbara or Brett?
Barbara can argue the intricacies of a nuclear deal. That's really not my area. I'll just say they're starting the nuclear program again. I don't think Donald Trump realizes the corner into which his national security team has put him in. The decision will be, do we do a military strike or not? And Trump has already shown he doesn't want to do that. So we have a maximum pressure policy without the backbone of a president that's ready to see it through. So even if I took this, and I agree with a lot of what my colleagues to the right of the stage say, this strategy just really makes no sense. But the question really is, they have a nuclear program. This is reality, folks. And in terms of the entire internet, the intelligence community, all the agencies of the intelligence community, in their report, they say, and they've said it consistently now, and the State Department just confirmed it a few months ago, Iran is not now going through the mechanisms through which to produce a nuclear weapon. They have not done that
But
since
Brett,
2003.
your opponent's argument has been that the Americans and perhaps also the inspectors are guilty of or have committed self-deception. They're kidding themselves, and that was two of your opponents made that.
So I just got to say,
so
look,
take that on.
Look, it's a dangerous world out there, as President Trump has said, but sometimes you have to trust the unanimous judgment of the intelligence community, and I recognize the intelligence community can be wrong. They can be wrong.
Absolutely kidding. The agency
now
has an
have-
incredible track record on nuclear issues, let alone so many other issues, of getting things wrong.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the 2007 NIE said clearly they had stopped developing their nuclear weapons program. The Israeli archives that were snitched out of Tehran clearly show that's false. It is an untenable position now.
Barbara Slavin.
Bibi Netanyahu is running for re-election. If there were a real facility in Iran working covertly on nuclear weapons, he would have disclosed it to the world. Instead, he had some pathetic announcement the other week about some facility. It wasn't even clear if it was nuclear or a missile that the Iranians had destroyed. There is not at present a program, a dedicated program to make nuclear weapons. But there will be.
There is.
There will be if the United States stays out of the JCPOA, if the sanctions remain, and this agreement falls apart.
I think a logical mind has to look at the Persian material, and I don't think you've looked at it, Barbara, since you don't know Persian, that if you look at the material, it is clear there is a program. That program continued after 2003. Now, why would the Iranians have stopped a program that they had invested to a clandestine program which they knew the Americans and others were going to come after? Why would they stop it?
Michael Doran, I want to take on the part of this deal that Iranian assets were frozen and sanctions were lifted. There was a financial payoff for the Iranians as a result of this deal, which they now lose. But what are the implications of that payoff having been in place? And Brett McGurk and Barbara agree.
It was their own
that
money,
they're not
It
actually
was their
spending-
own oil money. We didn't give them anything.
But they can now have more money to do bad stuff if that's what they want to do. But you two have argued that they're not actually spending that much money on bad stuff. But I want you to take that point on, Michael.
Well, look, Brett, I say this with respect and love. And
Uh-oh.
great, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. right? On the one hand, you're saying we need to contain Iran, but on the other hand, you're saying, well, they have a nuclear program and there's nothing we can do about it. And oh, by the way, the main actor in the Middle East who's going to help us contain Iran in the Arab world, Saudi Arabia, we have a problem with them as well. So when you start adding up all of the different positions you're taking, you're really saying we have to give Iran a pass. And the choice is not between war and giving them a pass. The choice is containment. Just like we did with the Soviet Union throughout its entire history. One of the problems with the deal is, there are two major problems with the deal. One, it did not stop their program in any way. It just allowed them to reconfigure it and gave an international legitimacy for a program that continued. And it handed them enormous resources to pursue their aggressive policies across the region, and that's why they're now in Yemen, which they weren't before until the JCPOA. It's why they are now running the show. They're more influential in Iraq than we are, and they are running the government, basically, certainly the military forces of Syria. All of that happened within the context of the JCPOA. It's not simply a nuclear deal. It was a pass to Iran writ large.
So I have to say, look, let's bring this conversation into the Situation Room, and the facts are Iran has a nuclear program. They definitely have a civilian nuclear program. No question they had a weapons program. I don't always trust the intelligence I get, but it is a unanimous judgment that they are not now pursuing a nuclear weapon. Before the deal, they were 1 to 2 months away from being able to develop a bomb. The question here, the big question is, this is a question the president will face, any future president.
How many months are they away now?
According to the intelligence community, and is a year. But Mike, the point is, they have this program. It's a fact. Do we bomb it?
We bought 10 months.
Do we bomb it?
We bought 10 months.
That's a lot of time.
And opened all the doors of the region to them and bought 10 months.
When your stupid Bush administration invaded Iraq, we opened the region to them. I mean, you have to look at all the factors. This is not the fault of the JCPOA. This is the fault of foolish and stupid U.S. intervention in the region. Support for autocratic regimes like Saudi Arabia. I mean, Iran has an affinity with these groups. Why? Because many of them are oppressed Shia minorities. If Saudi Arabia treated its own Shia better, there would be no room for Iran to play. If Saddam Hussein had not oppressed the Shia majority of his country, we would not see what we have now.
Barbara,
I mean, you can't put it all on the JCPOA. It's ridiculous.
I remind you.
I'm just curious. Would you use that argument in Syria?
I was just going to say. I was just going to remind you.
Syria.
I was just going to remind you of the 500,000 people who have been killed
well, there was
at the hands of the Iranians.
There was something called the Arab Spring, which had nothing to do with the JCPOA. And Assad is a brutal bastard, and there is no doubt that he has had support from Iran, and there's no doubt that he's had support from Russia.
Iran runs the military forces on the ground in Syria. There's no Syrian army.
It's Iran and Iran with a nuclear weapon is going to make
And that concludes our debate on this second resolution. The world is safer without the JCPOA.